All right, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of It's Personal. I am super excited for my guest today. Most recently found out that we are both Canadians, and I normally don't have two Canadians on, so I'm so curious about that. But I will allow her to introduce herself first.
Yes, Canada in the building. It also never happens for me to be interviewed by a fellow Canadian podcaster who also happens to be a children book author. So I'm really
Mhm.
honored to be here with you. So my name is Rahma Rodaah. I am a mom of four. I live in Alberta, Canada, and I write picture books.
Beautiful
And
picture
yeah,
books. Beautiful
thank
picture
you.
books. I always start with this question. I think I'm curious. I know a little bit of your story just from hearing you online, talking about your books and your experience. But tell us a little bit about the little girl who grew up immigrating to Canada.
I think my story, like when you go back into the books that I like to write, is mainly, I think, same as you, like for that representation to see yourself in books and why that is important. So a little bit about the my story is I came to Canada when I was seven. We immigrated when almost when the Civil War was starting in Somalia, and we immigrated in Quebec. And that was really shocking because in Quebec, at that time, there wasn't a big wave of immigrants that were coming from Africa. And so I oftentimes found myself to be the only Black Muslim girl, in my classes. And then I have vivid memories of being in these classes where they couldn't really place you in school because I didn't have any formal school training.
Hmm.
So they put you in a class where they call the classe d'accueil, where it's like welcoming class, where like you're just like being welcomed into the country, but it really didn't feel welcoming. Is um, for my recollection, really tough years in the beginning, and just that notion of coming from a place where everyone looked like me and
Hmm.
everyone spoke the language that I spoke, to coming to a country where no one looked like me and I didn't know the languages that were being spoken. That really stayed with me and it really imprinted on me, and that sense of belonging and that sense of seeing myself and all of these things were things that I carried with me. And I think that is just, what I try to give back to kids, to see themselves in these magical stories where they can be anybody, anything, where they're the main character mainly.
Hmm. Hmm. And you must have gone through so much as a immigrant, a newcomer to Canada in those school systems because, yeah, I'm from Nova Scotia. I consider myself very lucky to have grown up in a community that is predominantly Black, and I at least went home to that after school. And I can only imagine not going back home to that in regards to community wise. Who are some of the people that like kept your spirits high, kept you motivated? Because there has been times where you've talked about being bullied or being targeted from kids. Who are the people that influence you to keep going? Because as a kid, it's hard. It can be really
Yeah.
hard to want to go back to school, and school should be a safe place, and it wasn't always a safe place for you. So, who are some of those people?
I think just my parents, honestly, because we were going into this together, right? I'm the oldest of my parents would have seven kids. But at that time when we immigrated, there was just me and my two younger siblings. And we didn't really have any other family. And in Quebec, like I said, there wasn't a big community of Somalis at that time.
Hmm.
So we were there for 2 years, and after those 2 years, we moved to Ottawa, where there was that community of Somalis, where there were kids of from back home, from where I was from. That I found community there, but the first 2 years there really wasn't anybody outside of my family that I could really lean on
Hmm.
to kind of give me motivation. It was just basically my parents speaking love into me and letting me know that They know how hard it was, but sometimes I couldn't even explain how difficult it was because they were also going through like their own struggles. So
Hmm.
I didn't even have language to explain
Of
like how
course.
hard of a life it was. And so I'm grateful that after those 2 years we did move to Ottawa, where there was that sense of community, where I wasn't the only Somali girl in class, where even though I was still struggling with the language, there was other people that spoke Somali, and
Hmm.
that where we had a community where in the neighborhood there was other Somali kids and other Somali
Wow.
families, and we found community that way, and which was such like a world of difference, where I
Hmm.
saw everyone struggling like me, but
Hmm.
we found solace in each other.
Hmm. What were some of the books that you were, I don't want to say given or introduced to growing up in school?
Hmm. I think one of the first books that I really connected with was Anne of Green Gable.
Oh my God, my wife talks
That
about this book so much. That's the first book that she
yeah,
talks about too.
I I was so obsessed. And if you guys don't know, like I mean, I'm sure like Anne of Green Gable is classic everywhere. But it is a Canadian classic, and it was like a mandatory read. And Anne of Green Gable, she looks nothing like us as a white Canadian with red hair, but I connected with her story because like she was an outsider, and she was also outspoken. She was a feisty, opinionated character. And I always saw myself as that. Like I had stories, and I wasn't afraid of confrontation. And
Hmm.
yeah, I got bullied, but I always spoke back, and I always like, I pushed back, and I just loved and I really connected with her story of wanting to find belonging, and the feeling of being rejected, and the
Hmm.
feeling of wanting to have a place, like that sense of even like friendship, and how dramatic she is.
Uh-huh.
I just and then that's when I like realized that books, where even though the characters sometimes don't look like yourself, there is parts of people that you can identify yourself. So like this concept of finding books that look like me, like that wasn't a thing, because any of the books that people like or teachers would recommend, they were always like things that I'm like, this is not really written from
Uh-huh.
a
Or an
place that
animal.
is out of love, exactly,
Yeah.
like out of love, or things like that. But Anne of Green Gables I loved. That was one
Yeah.
of my first like books that I fell in love with.
It's crazy how much specifically people of color, people from the global majority have to reach out, or I mean, I would even say now, but like even more so back then, how we would have to search for that belonging. Because like looking at a book like that, you're not right away thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have so many connections. You're like, okay, this is something that I'm required to read. And then luckily, for whatever reason, you're able to look at a text and be like, oh, even though she doesn't have the same experiences as me, as like, you know, a person of color, I can still make connections. And that's hard work for a kid. Like that is really, really
Hmm.
hard work for a kid. Like those are things that we specifically, explicitly have to teach kids in the classroom to do. And for you to be able to do that at a young age is incredible. So shout out to Anna Green Gables, because a lot of people have
Yes.
connected to that book, even though she does not look like a lot of different people who have brought up in Canada, have immigrated to Canada, etc. Um, I want to talk about I want to call it a series of books, but I'm going to let you tell me whether it's going to be a series or not. But there are two Dear series, like you have Dear Black Child and Dear Muslim Child. And one of the things I'm thinking about, you speak about this very often, how, there's has been, and I would say, you can correct me if I'm wrong, often stigmatism, negative impact on just like how Muslims are portrayed in books, or lack thereof in general. Um, how did your experiences like impact or inspire you to write these stories? And what was that first story where you were like, oh, this is something that like is connecting to like not just my faith, but like who I am and the people around me as well.
Yeah. Um, So actually, like before I even get to my latest two books, I started out as a self-published author. So I
Mm,
published two other books previous to these traditionally published books. And the reason why I did that is because I had a hard time finding books that were featuring Black Muslim characters. And just kind of reflecting back on these two big identities that, I embody, and so are my children, is I found a lot of books that were targeted towards the Muslim children, and they all are kind of these books. And I would say that there are some that have Black protagonists and characters and things like that, but mainly they look like from Arab descent. They have pale skin, and it's not featuring the Black identity and the Black
mhm,
features that my children have. So I would have these stacks of books of like Islamic children picture books, and then I have the stacks of Black, beautiful African
mhm,
American illustrated and written books where they
mhm,
celebrate their Black skin and hair, and just what it means to be Black, and talk about that how hard that is. And I just, even, and if we even go back into my story, picture books are something that I didn't really read because I
mhm,
came to Canada when I was 7. So there were simple books that was introduced in order to learn phonics, and I actually learned to read in French. So my second language is French, and English is my third language. But but I didn't have that time where, picture books are written to me. So I discovered picture books when I had kids. And that's when that issue, I found that there is this gap of not there's no picture books that address these two big identities. And I was like,
mhm,
okay, well, that this is a problem. And I every night we will alternate between these two stacks of books. And then the story, my first picture book story, came to me, and I didn't really think that I would be an author, honestly, because when you're the first immigrant of a family that came, and the only family, telling your parents that you wanted to have a career in literature, that doesn't fly, right? It doesn't. They're like, no, no,
uh-huh.
we will not have that. You can become a lawyer, a doctor, like, you know what I mean. So that wasn't in the cards for me, but I'm really grateful that God brought me back into an alignment with the gifts that He has given me, because I do believe that we have certain gifts and affinities, and it's up to us to nurture those things, and really
Mhm,
live in the purpose that were given to us. And so that's really what I set out to do. Is I wanted to have representation for Black Muslim children out
mhm,
there, that they didn't need to compromise their faith to be something, or they didn't need to compromise who they are, and that both of these things were given to them by God. And so those two things are important to me. So my two first picture books were just featuring Black Muslim children. And
mhm,
so when I wrote Dear Black Child, I said this book needs to be traditionally published because I wanted to be read by so many kids. And I knew that it needed to go further than I could do. And so that's why I set out to kind of look for a publisher. And
mhm,
when I got discovered and I got a two-book deal, I said the next book is going to be Dear Muslim Child, because it has to be.
mm,
And so that's how these two books came to be, because I wanted a love letter to Black children. And that's what I wrote first. And then I'm like, okay, well, we have to write Dear Muslim Child, because that's
mhm,
also near and dear to my heart. And so that's how these two books came. And if it's a series, I don't know. I haven't, it's very difficult to write stories that don't have stories. I don't know if
yeah,
you've experienced the same
I
thing.
get that.
It's really difficult to do. And it's also even in the parts of the illustration. How do they portray that? Your book is so beautiful. And I feel like it's such a beautiful companion to Dear Black Child. I'm from like, it's in the same type of
Agreed.
poetry writing as that. And but it's hard to do. It's
Mhm,
really hard to do. You have to kind of connect to it and have this moving language that addresses so many things, um, without being a story. So in the future, I would love to write more dear something.
Mhm.
Have I done that yet? No. And so, but this is why these two dear books exist.
Mhm. And they are beautiful and phenomenal and all the things. So yeah, no pressure at all. No pressure, but I appreciate both of them so much. And I was going to ask about your story because you also talk a lot about like your self-publishing journey. And I think people forget that that is actually an option. That is
Mm-hmm,
something people
mm-hmm.
do for a living. You don't always have to be published by a big company to get your work out there. And sometimes it takes a long time to just crack the code, figure out how to get an agent, how to query a letter, how to figure out a manuscript. Like those things take a lot of time and effort. So I love that you speak so openly about like your journey because that is what a lot of people do. That is what a lot of
I
people do.
know.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that I had a really positive experience with self-publishing because
Hmm.
when I set out to self-publish, I didn't actually do it this because I failed at traditionally publishing. I did it because that was the choice that I made. And I really think that it also helped me have a stronger voice in the
Hmm.
traditionally published industry. Because when I came in, I already knew this is what I want to do. I already
Hmm.
knew, like, I already had a brand, I already had a platform, I already had, like, all the things that I knew that I was going to do as an author. I had started years ago. So I was very clear on what I was writing and who I was writing for and
Hmm.
what I was looking for in terms of a partnership and, like, a publisher. And so I think that that really helped me advocate for myself too. It really
Hmm.
did. So I always tell people self-publishing is a choice and is a choice that you can make, and there's pros and cons in both.
Yeah,
Honestly, everything is
totally.
not great on just one side. There's
Yeah,
pros and cons on both options. Yeah.
yeah. And you're a great writer, and I don't think it's easy. It's not easy for anybody to just write something and give it to an agent and them be like, "Okay, I enjoy your work." Like there's proof in what you do as a writer, and what you do is really, really great for kids and enjoyable for adults to read. So I think it takes practice and trial and error and all the things to figure out your voice as a writer, and you're doing it, and I appreciate it. So
Thank
thank you.
you. Thank you. Thank
You
you. It's
do
hard.
yeah, you do a
It's
lot.
hard.
Yeah, you do a
Yes.
lot. So I also know that you are a mother. You've done, I don't know if the kids are still being homeschooled, but you do homeschool. You're an author, a wife. You have a lot of hats that you wear.
Yeah.
What do you do to balance all those things? What are some things that you do to balance? And then on top of that, my follow up question is, what are some things you do for joy outside of the busy stuff that you do?
Balance is hard. I don't think there's ever any equal balance in
Mhm,
life. Like when you're doing so many different things, I think they're just kind of different things that you're prioritizing over others at different chapters in your life.
mhm,
So I am homeschooling the kids. I used to, when I started writing, I was working full time and I had two kids. So I stepped away from my full time job at this time and decided that because obviously that I am homeschooling the kids, so I'm home most of the time. I do have help, and so the part of the balancing is me stepping away
mhm,
and having help at home and kind of trying to segment my different things that I do. So I do have help that comes in. We have a part time nanny. So I go out and write somewhere else. And then I come back in and we do what we need to do at home. And then, so that's how I have separate areas.
mhm,
Things commingle sometimes as well.
mhm,
And ideas, as you know, writing, ideas can come to you at any moment. So you have to have something handy and you have to have something where you can jot something down and you get back to it, where you write in different increments. Just making sure that it's hard to do everything full time. So I
Mhm.
try to just kind of do things in different sections. And in terms of what was the other part of the question?
Joy, what do you do for joy?
Joy, reading. But I think like joy for so what I do for joy, like I consume different art forms.
Mm.
So sometimes when I read, I'm sometimes reading like
Does
I want
reading
to write like
count? Does reading count,
that's
though?
what I was gonna say because right now, like I'm into reading novels in verse because I want to
Uh,
write a novel in verse. So I'm reading these novels in verse and studying them in a way that I'm studying, right? So I found that now reading is not completely in the realm of joy. So I've started consuming arts in different forms of storytelling. Like for example, I took the kids to a play last week, and we saw the Three Musketeers. And
fun.
so that was a form of storytelling, open mic poetry. Like I try to consume different art, like beautiful movies or different,
Mhm.
like different type of art that is storytelling based, and I think all art is storytelling. But that's what I try to do so that I can see someone else in their elements of excellence to inspire me in my own, because now reading is almost like studying,
Mhm.
because you
It
have
is.
to read in order to be a writer,
Mhm.
and
I
sometimes it's
totally
hard.
agree.
But I found that audiobooks are I enjoy those. Audiobooks are
Yes.
really enjoyment. Audiobooks and podcasts.
If I'm gonna
Podcasts.
recommend a book to you because before I forget, so I just read a book called How the Boogeyman Became a Poet by Tony
Okay.
Keith Jr. Uh, when I mean this was the one of the best, if not the best, audiobook that I've listened to in
Mm,
such a long. It is absolutely stunning, stunning. Just the way it's written in verse. It's a kind of like a memoir type. I would say I think it's I want to say it's YA middle grade, probably more YA than anything. But you have to read this book, and you're also studying books that are free verse.
yes.
Amazing,
Okay.
absolutely
Okay. Well,
amazing. Yes.
we have to definitely exchange like audio, because I love people that recommend good books to me, but sometimes I try to listen to books that I necessarily maybe wouldn't read in print.
Uh huh.
And sometimes books take me back so good. They're so good that I'm like, I have to buy the print version now
I
and I
agree.
have
Me
to
too.
read it.
Me too.
So
Me
like
too.
audiobooks, and some people say it doesn't count, but I firmly believe it
Oh
counts
my gosh,
as
totally.
reading.
I do this. I tell my kids all the time in the classroom, like they are constantly, not constantly, but they love listening to books on Epic Books. They are constantly trying to find audiobooks. And I think partially because I do push that. I think it's such a great way. Like I think kids learn so well. I'm teaching in an international school, so they're technically all, for the most part, EAL kids. Like they're all trying to learn English. So when they're listening to English, someone else speak English words, like that is so valuable for them as
Hmm.
learners. Like they
Hmm.
are not just having to read the words on the
Right.
page, they're hearing them being pronounced constantly. So yeah, I think audiobooks is such a great form of reading, and it is 100% reading just like on the page. For sure.
I firmly believe that. Like, when I became a mom is when I discovered audiobooks, and I've
Hmm.
never looked back. And I have a stack of audiobooks that I have listened to audiobooks, some of them that I purchased afterwards and read it again because I enjoyed it so much.
Hmm.
But audiobooks is just it's just,
Uh,
yeah, it's a different art form that I and it's an art because you have these people that are speaking in all these different
Incredible.
voices. It's an art form. It's almost like watching a play, but you're just listening to it and you
Hmm.
fill in the blanks of what you see. I love it.
Yeah, and no, it's stunning. It's absolutely stunning. And the last question I had for you was: looking ahead, what are your hopes and goals for your writing?
Oh, okay. I hope to publish more books. I also hope to give back in other ways. So currently, right now, I do teach grade 5 and grade 6 creative writing. So I hope to have more of an impact directly with kids in different areas. So I've also thought about doing an online creative writing program for children. I want kids to fall in love with reading and writing, and I want them to find their voices early on. And I just want them to be passionate about creative writing and just encourage them to do that. And I hope to see more books for me. It's a difficult chapter, trying to juggle all the things that we talked about. But
Hmm.
I hope that I'm able to have some of these new works published in the near future.
I hope so too. And I'm sending you all the positive vibes your way. We need more books from
Thank
you.
you.
Where can people find you online?
So I am on all the platforms, but the one that I like, the one that I engage the most on is currently Instagram. So you can find me on all the social media platforms at Rahma Rodaah.
I appreciate you, friend. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has
Thank
been
you.
such a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.